Chapter 2, March 1st, Amicalola State Falls Park Shelter, Georgia. Miles hiked today, 1. Total miles hiked on the Appalachian Trail, 0. Weather, clear, getting cold. The man at the park gate waved me through without making me pay. I saw that the sign said $2 per vehicle, and I guessed that since I was walking, I didn't count. I wondered if he would remember me, if someone came looking for me, if there was a search team or something. I hoped not. I was wearing a wool hat, and I pulled it farther down so he couldn't see my face. I walked along the road toward the buildings just ahead. Mountains rose up in a half circle in front of me. I felt like I was walking into the bottom of a bowl. The sun was almost down, and the trees, still bare of leaves, shone golden brown in the fading orange light. The pine trees closer to me were scraggy and wild. There were cars in the parking lot, but no people that I could see. The road forked, signs pointing one way to the campground, another to the lodge. The visitor center was closed, which pleased me. The toilets were locked, which didn't. Behind the building, I found a perfect rectangle of lawn, bordered with stone walls and bisected by a sidewalk that led beneath a stone archway to a packed dirt trail, the start of the approach trail. I had read all about it. Something as grand and difficult as the Appalachian Trail would never start at the bottom of a mountain. It starts at the top, at the very summit of Springer. So the approach trail runs 9 miles uphill to the start. The guidebooks all say things like, "Don't think the approach trail is any walk in the park," which is pretty stupid given how much of the trail really is a walk in some kind of a park. But I understood that the approach trail was going to be difficult, and looking at the bottom of it, I could see why. It meandered up through the trees, up to the left, and up, up, up. I had read that the 3,000 people trying to through hike in any of the more recent years, over 10% never made it to the top of Springer. 10% never made it to the start. Only another 10% actually made it all the way to Katahdin. But I figured most of them didn't want to get there as badly as I did. Even with the heavy pack holding me back, my legs, my shoulders, my brain all seemed to pull me forward, faster, away, away. But not that night. It was getting dark quickly and the air was cold and damp. I went through the archway and up the hill a few steps, then left, and there, exactly where the book said it would be, was a shelter. Dark and empty. More good luck. The shelter had a roof and 3 wooden walls, a screened-in front with a door. Inside, 2 rows of bunks with wire mesh bottoms stretched from one side of the shelter to the other. Room for 8, more in a pinch. I peed behind a bush just outside the shelter, then went inside, unrolled my sleeping bag across the bottom bunk in the corner, and unloaded most of my gear. I found my stove, my fuel bottle, my water bottles, all full, my pot, and my food bag. I set up the stove on a platform in front of the shelter, just the way I'd practiced at home. I reached into my pack for my matches to light it, except that I didn't have any matches. My hand closed on the empty film canister I'd meant to fill with matches, just as my brain remembered that I hadn't done it. I had put most of my gear together at the last minute to keep things secret. We had lots of matches in the kitchen at home. I'd forgotten them. I dumped everything out of my food bag: noodles, soup mixes, hot chocolate, instant oatmeal, tea. I'd chosen food that was light and wouldn't spoil, and therefore food that needed to be mixed with water and boiled. I was getting colder and wanted something hot. The shelter was awfully dark now, too. I didn't have a flashlight because I didn't think I could afford the batteries, and I didn't want to carry anything I couldn't use. Don't panic, I told myself. I didn't. I ate the rest of my raisins and one of my 3 chocolate bars and the apple I'd picked up on my way out of the house that morning. I drank some cold water, stirred more water into a packet of instant oatmeal, and made myself eat it, even though it tasted like sweet, gritty glue. I used the water in my second bottle to rinse the bowl and spoon, realized I didn't have any water left to brush my teeth, and decided I'd look for water in the morning. There had to be some somewhere. By now I was really cold, but I remembered that I was supposed to take some of my clothes off, or else the sweat trapped in them would condense inside my sleeping bag. I took my jacket off, and after some thought, my socks. I put on a clean pair of socks and my second shirt and climbed into my icy sleeping bag. Then I remembered I'd forgotten to hang up my food. If you don't hang up your food at night, mice eat it, or worse, bears. I jumped out of my sleeping bag, shivering violently, stuffed all the food I could find into my food bag, and after 3 tries, managed to throw a rope around one of the shelter's rafters and hang the bag from the ceiling. I jumped back into my sleeping bag and lay shivering while I wondered what else I'd forgotten. Matches were easy. I could get matches anywhere. I went through a mental list of everything I'd meant to bring and tried to picture where each item was inside of my pack. I thought I'd remembered everything else. It was probably only about 7 o'clock. I couldn't read my watch in the dark, and I wasn't really sleepy, but I didn't have anything else to do. When I had tried to imagine what life on the trail would be like, I'd always pictured the shelters crowded with people, happy people, all happy to be hiking the trail. It had never occurred to me that I'd spend my first night alone. I couldn't see the moon from the inside of the shelter. I wondered if there were stars. I was used to waking up alone and getting myself off to school, but I'd never been alone at night before. It was an interesting feeling. After a while, I found I didn't mind it. I wasn't scared, not with the trail so close and the shelter walls around me. Maybe this was how my parents felt, their first night out, before they found each other, before the disasters began. Maybe they had been happy. I woke in the night shivering. My sleeping bag was rated to 20 degrees, but it must have been below that, and I'd been stupid enough to take off my hat. I got up and fumbled in the dark, trying to find it, and my fleece jacket. Suddenly, I heard a noise almost exactly under my left hand, a rough, low growl that did not sound like a mouse or an insect or anything else I expected in a shelter. I screamed. The thing on the bunk rolled over with a swish of nylon and sat up partway and became a man, a hiker, sleeping in his own sleeping bag. He looked up. "Problem?" he asked. I put my hands over my mouth. "I thought you were a bear." He seemed to consider this for a moment. "The shelters with closed-in fronts, you'd hear a bear trying to get in," he said. "I didn't hear you come in." I shivered again, found my jacket, and pulled it on. He laughed. "True, but I'm quieter than your average bear. Better with door handles, too." I was beginning to feel really dumb, so I climbed back into my bag. "Sorry," I said. He rolled over in his bag. "No problem. Good night."